I'm so glad you're here. My name is Irene, and I'm a 68-year-old widow who always believed that family comes first. If you're watching this, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, because I want you to hear my story about how I taught my own son a lesson in respect he would never forget. My old Toyota Camry was the last piece of my late husband I had left. It was our history sitting in that garage. But last Saturday, I stood in the shadows and listened to my son, Caleb, make a deal to sell it behind my back. He called me a foolish old woman and told the buyer my signature would be easy enough to fake. He thought I was weak. He thought the car was his for the taking. He had no idea that I was already one step ahead and that his public humiliation was scheduled for his own son's 18th birthday party. I want to know how far my story has reached, so please tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? The scent of old leather and the faint, lingering aroma of Frank's morning coffee still clung to the interior of the 1998 Toyota Camry. It wasn't just a car, it was my time machine. Every time my hand closed around the worn gear shift, I was transported. I was 20 years younger, driving a newborn Caleb home from the hospital, his tiny form impossibly small in the rearview mirror. I was 10 years younger, laughing as Frank tried to navigate a winding coastal highway with a map flapping in the wind. I could almost hear his voice, clear as if he were sitting beside me. "Irene," he'd said the day we bought it, patting the dashboard, "this car will outlast both of us. One day, it'll be telling stories to our grandkids." That one day was today. The bright Saturday morning sun warmed the driveway of my suburban home, glinting off the buckets of soapy water. My grandson, Liam, stood beside me, a lanky 17-year-old with his grandfather's kind eyes and an easy smile that could melt the winter frost. "Okay, Grandma," he said, holding a large yellow sponge. "Show me the secret. How did Grandpa always get it to shine like that? It looks better than my friend's brand new car." I smiled, my heart swelling with a familiar mix of pride and nostalgia. "The secret, my dear boy, is patience, and a little bit of this." I held up a bottle of Carnauba wax, the same brand Frank had used for over 2 decades. We spent the next hour washing the Camry. It was a comfortable, practiced ritual. I showed him how to clean the hubcaps with a soft bristled brush, just as Frank had shown me, and how to dry the windows with old newspapers to prevent streaks, a trick that always made Liam laugh. As we worked, the stories came easily, bubbling up like the soap in our buckets. "This little dent here," I said, pointing to a barely visible mark on the passenger door, "is from the time your grandpa and I brought home the biggest Christmas tree on the lot. He was so stubborn, insisted it would fit on the roof rack. We spent the whole drive home with me holding onto it through the window, laughing so hard I could barely breathe." Liam listened, his attention absolute. He wasn't like other kids his age, obsessed with touch screens and fleeting digital trends. He had an old soul. He cherished these connections to the past, to the grandfather he barely remembered but deeply admired. "It's a great car, Grandma," he said, running a clean, dry cloth over the hood, his reflection appearing in the deep green paint. "It feels real, not like all the plastic in new cars. It's got character." He looked up at me, his expression earnest. "I'd take this over some new sports car any day." Seeing him there, so sincere and hard-working, I saw a perfect reflection of my Frank. The same quiet strength, the same respect for things that were built to last, to mean something. It was in that moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that Frank's prophecy about the car was coming true. This legacy, this rolling vessel of memories, was meant for Liam. As we finished and stood back to admire our work, Liam leaned against the freshly cleaned car, a thoughtful look on his face. "Grandma," he said, his voice serious, all traces of boyishness gone for a moment, "when I turn 18 next week, will you teach me how to do the maintenance? You know, the oil changes, the spark plugs, everything. I want to keep it running forever." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, blurring the shining car in front of me. It was more than I could have hoped for. "Of course, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Of course I will. Your grandfather would have loved that." We took the Camry for a short drive around the neighborhood to let it air dry, the engine humming a familiar, comforting tune. The world felt right, peaceful, and full of promise, but as we pulled back into my driveway, the idyllic morning shattered. A gleaming, oversized SUV glided silently to the curb, its engine a low, menacing purr that seemed to mock the Camry's honest rumble. Caleb and Jessica. They had arrived for our weekly Sunday dinner a day early. Jessica stepped out, a vision in a crisp linen pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to. She waved, a wide, bright smile plastered on her face, but it never reached her eyes. The smile she offered from behind her large designer sunglasses wasn't one of warmth. It was one of assessment. It swept over me, over Liam, and then it settled on the shining Toyota Camry, lingering there with a cool, calculating edge that sent an unseasonable shiver down my spine. Jessica's smile never reached her eyes. Tonight, as she sat at my dining room table for what was supposed to be our weekly Sunday dinner, her smile was colder than the glass of iced tea sweating onto the polished wood. The easy warmth from my Saturday morning with Liam had completely evaporated, replaced by a familiar, cloying tension that always seemed to arrive with my son and his wife. The aroma of rosemary and garlic from the roast chicken filled the room, a homey scent that fought a losing battle against the strained atmosphere. "This chicken is simply divine, Irene," Jessica began, her voice as smooth as silk. She took a delicate bite, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment in performative pleasure. "You really are a miracle in the kitchen." "Thank you, Jessica," I said, my own smile feeling tight on my face. I knew this was her opening move. The compliment was the honey used to coat the bitter medicine she was about to administer. She dabbed her lips with a napkin. "You know, Caleb and I were talking on the way over." She glanced at my son, who was suddenly intensely focused on cutting his chicken into perfectly uniform pieces. Those things, they just don't have the modern safety features we take for granted now. Things like side curtain airbags or electronic stability control. Caleb, on cue, finally looked up, though his gaze skittered past me and landed somewhere on the wall behind my head. "She's right, Mom. The repair bills alone must be a fortune. It's a 27-year-old car. It's just not practical anymore." He cleared his throat, the words sounding like they had been practiced in the car on the way over. "Look, just let me handle it. I can find a buyer who'll give you a good price and you'll have a nice little nest egg for your retirement. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." A nest egg, as if 42 years of memories, of a life lived, could be traded for a stack of bills. The same memories I had just shared with his son, my grandson, less than a day ago. I felt a knot of anger and disappointment tighten in my stomach. They were working together, a well-oiled machine designed to wear down my resolve. "The car is not for sale," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. I looked directly at Caleb, forcing him to meet my eyes. "It was the last thing your father and I bought together. We drove you home from the hospital in that car. We took it on our last vacation together. Every time I get behind that wheel, he's there with me. It's worth more to me than any amount of money you could get for it." I had hoped to see a flicker of the boy who used to help his father change the oil on that very car, a glimmer of shared memory. Instead, his face was a mask of strained patience. His eyes filled with a weary frustration. It was Jessica who finally broke. Her sweet facade cracked, revealing the raw, ugly impatience beneath. "Oh, for goodness sake, Irene," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the polite dinner conversation. She threw her napkin down on the table. "It's just a hunk of junk. Frank is gone. Why are you clinging to the past like this?" The insult hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Caleb flinched as if he'd been slapped, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. He looked at me, then quickly looked away, saying nothing. He let his wife's cruel words stand, a silent, damning agreement. The rest of the dinner passed in a thick, suffocating quiet. They left soon after, offering hollow, mumbled goodbyes that I barely acknowledged. As I stood by the sink, rinsing the plates, I saw them pause under the porch light. Jessica wasn't bothering to whisper. Her voice was a low, angry hiss carried on the cool night air, a final twist of the knife in a fresh wound. "I told you she was stubborn," she said to Caleb. "This isn't working. We're going to have to be more forceful." Caleb called on Thursday evening, his voice overflowing with a manufactured kindness that set my teeth on edge. "Hey, Mom," he said, the cheerfulness sounding hollow. "Jessica and I were thinking, your garage is getting a little cluttered. How about I come over this weekend and give you a hand cleaning it out? Make some space for you." The offer hung in the air, a Trojan horse built of good intentions, an act of unusual kindness that, after Sunday night, felt more like a threat than a favor. As I agreed with a non-committal murmur, my late husband Frank's words echoed in my mind, a piece of fatherly wisdom he'd offered Caleb years ago. "Be wary of anyone, son," he'd said, "who suddenly becomes kind for no reason." I now realized the advice was meant for me all along. The afternoon was warm and golden, one of those perfect late summer days. I was in my backyard, kneeling in the flower bed, my hands deep in the rich soil as I tended to the roses Frank had planted. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a hammer was a comforting sound nearby. Liam was patiently mending a loose board on the back fence, his brow furrowed in concentration, a mirror image of his grandfather. We worked in easy silence, the way people who truly enjoy each other's company often do, sharing the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The mood shattered when Caleb's SUV pulled into the driveway. He walked into the backyard, his expensive work shoes out of place on the soft grass. His smile was a tight, thin line that didn't soften the irritation in his eyes as he took in the scene. His mother and his son, happy and content in a world that didn't seem to require him. "Hey, Dad," Liam called out, grinning, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Perfect timing. Grandma was just telling me she'll teach me how to take care of the Camry when I turn 18. She said you used to help Grandpa with it all the time." Caleb's gaze hardened, flickering from his son's bright, innocent face to mine. The thin veneer of pleasantry he'd arrived with cracked. "It's just an old car, Liam. Don't get your hopes up," he said, his tone dismissive and sharp. He then turned to me, and the accusation in his voice was unmistakable. "You always spoil him." The words were laced with a bitterness that startled me, a raw, childish jealousy that was ugly and out of place. This wasn't about the car, not really. It was about Liam. It was about the easy, loving bond my grandson and I shared, a bond Caleb clearly resented, feeling like an outsider in the warmth of his own family's history. Before I could formulate a response, Caleb's eyes swept across the yard and settled on the garage, his expression turning cold and determined. The false kindness from his phone call was completely gone. "This weekend," he announced, his voice clipped and authoritative, "I'm cleaning out that garage. It's full of old junk that needs to be tossed." His glare was fixed directly on the Camry, visible through the open door. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a declaration of intent. It was about making space, all right, by removing a piece of my heart. That evening, long after Liam had gone home, a strange flicker of light from the garage caught my eye through the kitchen window. My heart began to pound. I stepped onto the dark back porch and saw Caleb inside, the single bare bulb overhead illuminating him. He had a tape measure in his hand and was meticulously measuring the length and width of the Camry, jotting down numbers in a small notebook. "Caleb?" I called out, my voice sharper than I intended, making him jump. He spun around, startled, and quickly shoved the tape measure and notebook into his back pocket. A guilty flush crept up his neck. "Mom, I was just, checking the dimensions," he stammered, unable to look me in the eye. for some storage shelves to help you get organized. It was a clumsy, obvious lie, and we both knew it. He wasn't planning to install shelves. He was sizing up a coffin for a piece of my soul. The silence in the garage was more suffocating than any accusation. It was Saturday morning, and Caleb had arrived, true to his word, to help me clean. He made a great show of it, noisily dragging old boxes across the concrete floor and creating a cloud of dust that hung in the air. He thought I was in the kitchen, baking for Liam's party, but his manufactured activity was the perfect cover for my own quiet mission. I remembered Frank's insistence, years ago, on keeping all our important documents, deeds, wills, car titles, in the heavy fireproof metal box he kept tucked away on the highest shelf in the garage. I told Caleb I needed to find some old tax records, an excuse plausible enough to grant me access to the space he had so eagerly claimed. I found the box behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines, its gray paint covered in a thick layer of dust that felt like a shroud. The cold, familiar weight of it in my hands was a comfort, a tangible link to Frank's careful, protective nature. I was about to carry it inside, away from the noise and dust, when I heard Caleb's voice from just outside, on the patio. His bustling had stopped. His tone was low, conspiratorial, not the voice he used with me. "No, she's inside, busy with the cake. She won't hear a thing." Instinct took over. I froze, my body going rigid. I slipped behind a tall, rickety shelving unit stacked with old paint cans and forgotten gardening supplies, the metal box clutched to my chest like a shield. Peeking through a narrow gap, I could see his back. He was pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear, silhouetted against the bright morning sun. "Yeah, it's a 1998 Camry, but it's in great shape. My old man babied that thing." A short pause, then his voice sharpened with impatience. "Look, the price is the price. I need it gone and I need the cash. This isn't a negotiation." My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp, the metallic tang of old paint filling my nostrils. This was it. This was real. I wasn't being paranoid. "Listen, Jake, the timing has to be perfect," Caleb continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Next Saturday, a week from today, it's my kid's 18th birthday party. The whole family will be here. She'll be completely distracted with guests. The cake. All of it. You come around 3 o'clock. I'll have it parked out on the street, ready to go, keys in the ignition." He laughed, a short, ugly sound devoid of any humor that made my skin crawl. "Yeah, it's perfect. Poetic even, in a way." Another pause, and then came the words that would be seared into my memory forever. The words that severed the last thread of maternal hope and ignited a cold, hard fire in its place. "All right, $2,500. See you next Saturday during the kid's birthday party. My mom will be distracted." "What about the title?" "Don't worry about it. This old woman's signature is easy enough to fake." The phone clicked shut. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This old woman. He said it with such casual, dismissive cruelty. I heard his footsteps crunch on the gravel of the patio as he walked away, whistling a cheerful, carefree tune as if he'd just arranged a delivery of flowers. I remained hidden in the dusty shadows of the garage, unable to move, unable to breathe. The heavy metal box in my arms suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, an anchor drowning me in the truth. The silence he left behind was filled with the deafening sound of my world breaking apart. A single hot tear traced a path through the grime on my cheek, then another. The betrayal was absolute. It was complete. That night, I didn't sleep. The raw, searing pain of the afternoon's discovery slowly cooled over long, dark hours, hardening into the cold, sharp edge of resolve. I sat in the living room long after the moon had risen. The only light in the silent house coming from the small lamp on Frank's old desk. The house, once a sanctuary of memories, now felt like a crime scene, and I was its only witness. The heavy metal box sat on the desk before me. I hadn't moved from this spot since I'd brought it in from the garage hours ago, my body numb, my mind replaying Caleb's voice on a cruel, unending loop. This old woman's signature is easy enough to fake. My hands, which had trembled uncontrollably before, were now steady as I unlatched the rusty clasps. The contents were a paper and ink map of my life with Frank. Inside, nestled on top of decades of our shared history, was the original title for the 1998 Camry. The names Franklin and Irene Hayes were typed neatly, a relic from a time when our family felt whole, unbreakable. Beneath it were old insurance cards, repair receipts, and tucked into a small side pocket, a crisp, cream-colored business card. David Davies, attorney at law, Frank's best friend, his college roommate, the best man at our wedding. My son's words echoed again, each syllable a fresh wound, a fresh betrayal. I let myself cry then, but not the heaving sobs of a victim. These were quiet, bitter tears for the son I thought I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose nightmares I had soothed. I wept for the naive mother who had mistaken greed for concern and condescension for care. I wept for the illusion that had been shattered in the dusty silence of the garage. When the tears finally stopped, their wellspring dry, I looked over at the mantelpiece, at the framed photograph of Frank and me on our 25th anniversary. He was looking at me, his smile so full of life, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a love that had never wavered. He had been my protector, my partner, my anchor. And in his absence, I had failed to see the viper I had allowed to coil in our own home. He thought I was weak, Frank. I whispered into the quiet room, my voice hoarse. He thought his own mother was just a foolish old woman he could cheat out of the last piece of you I have left. My first instinct, a primal maternal rage, was to storm over to Caleb's house in the dead of night, to wake him and Jessica and demand to know how they could be so monstrous. But as I played the scene in my head, I knew with a sickening certainty how it would end. Caleb would lie. He would twist the story, deny everything, tell me I'd misunderstood, that I was confused. Jessica would stand beside him, her face a mask of sweet, wounded innocence, and together they would gaslight me until I questioned my own sanity. A direct confrontation was a battle I was destined to lose. It would be my word against theirs, and they would paint me as the hysterical, paranoid old woman they already believed me to be. No. Frank had never been a man for loud, messy fights. He was a planner, a strategist. He taught me that the smartest move is the one your opponent never sees coming. I needed a better plan, a quieter, colder, and far more effective one. My gaze fell back to the desk, to the lawyer's business card lying next to the car title, David Davies. A wave of absolute clarity washed over me, so sudden and powerful it was like a physical shock. The path forward was no longer murky with grief and confusion. It was a straight, narrow, and unyielding line. I picked up the small rectangular card, the sharp corners digging into my palm. "Frank," I whispered, a new hard strength solidifying my voice. "I know what to do now." The next morning, the sun streamed through the kitchen window, but it brought no warmth to the chill that had settled in my bones. I was sipping my coffee when my phone rang, the cheerful ringtone jarring in the heavy silence. It was Caleb. "Morning, Mom." His voice was bright, full of a manufactured cheerfulness that made my stomach turn. "Just wanted to call and say I finished cleaning out the garage for you. It looks a lot neater now." I held the phone to my ear, my expression unreadable. I looked out the window at the garage, at the scene of my heartbreak, and felt nothing but pure, unadulterated ice in my veins. "Thank you, son," I replied, my voice perfectly calm, even, and terrifyingly polite. David Davies' office hadn't changed in the 5 years since Frank's funeral. The moment I stepped inside on Monday morning, the familiar scent of old oak, leather-bound books, and aging paper enveloped me, giving me a strange sense of security. It was a room built on tradition and integrity, a fortress of quiet dignity, so much like the man who had been its master's best friend. This was a place where truth mattered. David, his hair now more silver than black, but his eyes just as sharp, greeted me not like a client, but like family. He led me to one of the worn leather chairs facing his massive desk, a silent, concerned understanding in his eyes. He had been Frank's closest confidant for over 40 years. "Irene," he said gently, his voice a low rumble that always reminded me of Frank's. "It's been too long. I can see on your face that something is deeply wrong." My resolve, so firm during the 2 sleepless nights I had just endured, wavered for a moment under his kind gaze. I took a deep breath, clutching my purse in my lap, and the story came pouring out. I told him everything. The cloying sweetness of Jessica's initial suggestions, Caleb's growing resentment, the uncomfortable Sunday dinner, and finally, the cold, cruel words I had overheard in the garage. As I spoke, I watched David's face transform from concerned surprise to utter disbelief, and then to a cold, quiet fury I had never seen in him before. When I repeated Caleb's plan to forge my signature, his knuckles whitened as he gripped a heavy fountain pen on his desk. He was silent for a long moment after I finished, his hands steepled before him. He stared at a photograph on his credenza, one of him and Frank on a fishing trip decades ago, both of them young and beaming. "He planned to forge your signature?" he finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He would be heartbroken. "No," he corrected himself, shaking his head. "He would be furious." He pushed his chair back and stood, his professional calm breaking. "That boy, Caleb, to disrespect you is one thing. To disrespect his father's memory like this, it's unbelievable. We have to stop him." "That's why I'm here, David," I said, my voice finding its strength again. "I want to know my options." He paced in front of the tall window overlooking the town square, his back to me. "Options? We could file a police report for attempted fraud. We could get a restraining order." He stopped and turned, a new, sharp light in his eyes. "But that's messy. It's loud. It gives him an opportunity to lie his way out of it, to paint you as a confused, grieving widow." He walked back to his desk and leaned forward, his hands flat on the polished wood. "Frank wouldn't want a messy fight. He'd want a checkmate." He proposed the plan then, not as a legal strategy, but as a necessary act of justice. It was simple, elegant, and utterly devastating. "We won't just sue him, Irene. That's a battle of words. We'll cut him off at the knees before he even knows what's happening. Transfer the title of the Camry to Liam. We do it legally, quietly, and immediately." He glanced at his calendar. "Liam's party is next Saturday, which is tight. I'll file the paperwork with an expedited processing request. It will cost a little extra, but it's the only way to ensure we get the new title back in time. And then," he said, a grim smile touching his lips, "we let your son walk right into the trap he set for you." I stared at him, the brilliance of the plan settling over me like a suit of armor. It was perfect. It wasn't just a defense, it was a reckoning, sprung from their own greed. David pulled a set of documents from a drawer and uncapped his heavy fountain pen, its nib scratching softly as he filled in the initial lines. He slid the papers across the desk to me. "Are you sure about this, Irene?" he asked, his voice softening once more. Full of genuine concern. "Frank always told me you were the strongest woman he knew. Now I understand why. But this will set off a bomb in your family." I looked down at the documents, at the blank line waiting for my signature. The bomb, I thought, was not of my making. I was merely choosing the time and place of its detonation. I picked up the pen, its weight cool and solid in my hand. "They already lit the fuse, David," I said, my hand perfectly steady as I leaned forward to sign. I'm just deciding when it goes off. The Department of Motor Vehicles on a Tuesday afternoon is arguably the bleakest place on earth. But today, for me, it felt like a sanctuary. The air was stuffy, thick with the smell of stale coffee and the quiet desperation of 100 people trapped in bureaucratic limbo. Fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune overhead, casting a flat, unforgiving glow on the rows of uncomfortable plastic chairs and the worn linoleum floor. David and I took a number, 112, and sat down to wait. The digital sign was currently serving number 87. I watched the faces around me. A young man no older than Liam, nervously tapping his foot as he clutched a learner's permit application. A mother trying to wrangle two restless children. An elderly man who had fallen asleep with his mouth open, a forgotten form resting on his lap. We were all here for mundane reasons: renewing a license, registering a vehicle, paying a fine. No one could know that I was here to sign a declaration of war, to perform a quiet, legal amputation on a part of my own family. The minutes crawled by, each tick of the large, institutional clock on the wall a small torture. As the disembodied voice on the loudspeaker called out, "Now serving number 91 at Windows 7, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out, my heart giving a nervous jolt. It was a message from Jessica. "Hi, Irene, just checking in. Hope you're having a good day. Have you reconsidered about the car? Caleb is so worried about you and your safety." I stared at the words, at the fake, cloying concern. Worried about my safety. The hypocrisy was so blatant, it almost made me laugh out loud. I handed the phone to David without a word. He read the message, and a look of pure disgust crossed his face before he carefully composed himself, handing it back. "Steel yourself, Irene," he murmured, his voice low and firm. "This is exactly why we're here." I didn't reply. I just deleted the message. The simple act of swiping it into oblivion, feeling like a small, satisfying victory. Her words didn't weaken my resolve. They forged it into something harder, colder, and more unbreakable than steel. Finally, after an hour that felt like a lifetime, the voice called out, "Now serving number 112 at Windows 7. We walked to the counter, where a tired-looking woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose waited impassively. David, with his professional, confident air, explained the situation and handed her the paperwork he had meticulously prepared. The original title, a notarized application for title transfer, and a copy of Liam's driver's license. She scanned the documents with a practiced, bored efficiency that was somehow comforting in its impersonality. "Signature of current owner here," she said, pointing to a line on the form without looking up from her screen. She slid the form and a cheap, blue ballpoint pen toward me. I took the pen, its plastic cool against my fingers. My hand did not shake. This was for Frank. This was for Liam. This was for the woman Caleb thought was foolish and weak. I signed Irene Hayes with a firm, deliberate stroke. It was not the shaky, uncertain signature of the old woman he thought he could so easily fake. It was the signature of a woman taking back control of her own story. The clerk took the form back, glanced at the signature, and then, with a deafening thud that echoed in the stuffy room, she slammed her official stamp down onto the paper. Processed. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so complete it almost made my knees buckle. It was done. It was irreversible. She handed me a flimsy, carbon copy receipt. "The new title will be mailed to the registered owner's address in 7 to 10 business days," she recited in a monotone, already looking past me to the next weary soul in line. We walked out of the DMV and back into the bright, unforgiving afternoon sun. I blinked, feeling as though I had emerged from a long, dark tunnel. I had done it. The weapon was armed and the countdown had begun. As we reached our cars, David put a reassuring hand on my shoulder, his expression serious. "Now comes the hardest part, Irene," he said, his voice full of a sober wisdom. "The waiting." From the day I left the DMV, I began the greatest and most painful performance of my life. the role of an aging mother, her resolve crumbling, slowly succumbing to her son's loving concern. The waiting, as David had called it, was an active, breathing thing. It required a constant, draining effort to appear frail when I felt a core of steel forming inside me, to sound hesitant when my mind was ruthlessly clear. I remembered the smugness on Caleb's face when he decided I was being stubborn. Now I would show him just how dangerous my softness could be. He stopped by on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 days after our trip to the DMV. I had strategically positioned myself in my favorite armchair by the window. A half-finished scarf for Liam draped over my lap, my knitting needles resting beside me. The house was quiet, filled with the golden, late-afternoon light that made the dust motes dance. He came in carrying a small bag of groceries I hadn't asked for, his smile a little too bright. "Just thought you might need a few things, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with a solicitude that was entirely new and utterly false. "Didn't want you to have to go out." I put my hand to my forehead and let out a small, theatrical sigh, letting my shoulders slump just so. "Oh, that's thoughtful of you, dear. I haven't been feeling quite myself these last few days." I let my knitting needles rest in my lap, as if the effort was too much. "To be honest, Caleb, I was just sitting here thinking. Driving has started to feel like such a chore. The Camry, it just feels a bit much for me some days. My legs get stiff." It was the bait, and he took it instantly, his eyes lighting up with a predatory gleam he tried to hide behind a mask of concern. He set the groceries on the counter and pulled a chair closer, his posture that of a doctor delivering a gentle diagnosis. "See, Mom? That's what Jessica and I have been saying. It's not about getting rid of the car. It's about your safety and your comfort." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential, caring tone. "I was actually looking at some newer models online for you. They have these incredible backup cameras and automatic braking, things that would make driving so much easier, you know? Less stress." He was so eager, so sure of himself. He saw a crack in my defenses and was pushing his way through with all the subtlety of a bulldozer. Inside, I felt a cold knot of satisfaction. He was falling for it completely. I let him talk, nodding slowly, my eyes downcast as if I were seriously considering his words. I allowed a look of weary confusion to cross my face. Then, as if on cue, I let my gaze drift to the photo of Frank on the mantelpiece, a silent, powerful actor in my little play. "I don't know, Caleb," I murmured, my voice soft and wistful, playing the part of the sentimental widow to perfection. "It was your father's car. There are just so many memories wrapped up in it." I let the sentence trail off, a weak, emotional objection that I knew he would see as the last gasp of a losing battle. He saw my hesitation not as a boundary, but as a final hurdle he was about to clear. He patted my hand, his touch feeling clammy and false. "I know, Mom, and we'll honor those memories. Of course we will. But Dad would want you to be safe, above all else. You know he would." He stood up to leave, confident he had planted the seed and it was finally taking root. As he walked to the door, I played my final MasterCard. I called out to him, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. Maybe you're right, Caleb," I said, looking up at him with what I hoped were tired, defeated eyes. "I am getting older." The triumphant gleam that flashed in his eyes was all the confirmation I needed. He gave me a final, reassuring nod, the kind one gives to a child who has finally seen reason, and stepped outside. I didn't move from my chair. I watched through the living room window as he walked to his pristine SUV. He didn't start the engine right away. I saw the pale blue light of his phone illuminate his face in the dimming twilight, and then I saw it, clear as day, a wide, self-satisfied smirk. He was texting Jessica. It's working. The fish was on the hook, and the reel was in my hand. Seeing my son's triumphant smirk through the window, I knew there was no turning back. The play had to be prepared meticulously, right down to the final scene. Jessica called the next day, her voice bubbling with an enthusiasm that was utterly false. "It will be so much fun, Irene. Liam's 18th birthday. The whole family, all of us together." I knew the whole family she envisioned was one where I played the part of a dotty, grateful old woman, and I was more than happy to oblige. In the days leading up to the party, my house became Jessica's command center. She arrived each afternoon with lists and swatches of fabric for tablecloths, her energy frantic and controlling. She took over everything, from the guest list to the playlist, dismissing my quiet suggestions with a pat on the arm. "Don't you worry your head about it, Irene," she'd say, her tone condescendingly sweet. "You just sit back and relax. We've got this handled." I smiled and allowed her to. Retreating to the background, a passive, happy grandmother observing the flurry of activity. It was the perfect cover. While Jessica was on the phone arguing with a party rental company about the color of balloons, I found a quiet moment with Liam in the backyard. He was talking about his college applications, his eyes bright with excitement. "I'm applying to the engineering program at the State University, Grandma, just like Grandpa Frank." He looked over at the garage. "He would have been proud, I think." My heart ached with a fierce, protective love. This wonderful boy, so full of his grandfather's integrity and dreams, was the reason I had to see this through. This was about protecting Frank's legacy for the one person who truly understood it. On Friday, the day before the party, I was in the kitchen, lost in the familiar, comforting ritual of baking Liam's favorite strawberry vanilla cake. While Jessica buzzed around the living room arranging streamers, I focused on the precise measurements of flour and sugar, the steady rhythm of the whisk against the bowl. Each careful step was a meditation, a way to channel my swirling emotions into something pure and good. I was frosting the final layer when Caleb came in from the backyard, leaving his phone on the counter as he grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. At that exact moment, the screen lit up. A text message preview from a contact named Jake's Auto. My eyes flickered to it, my hands freezing over the cake. Confirmed, 3 p.m. Saturday, we'll have cash on hand. My heart hammered against my ribs. There it was, the final confirmation. He didn't even bother to be discreet anymore. Just as he turned to pick up his phone, the mail slot clattered. "I'll get it," I called out, my voice surprisingly even. I walked to the front door, my back to him, and picked up the small pile of letters. Bills, junk mail, and there, at the bottom, was a plain brown envelope from the Department of Motor Vehicles. I quickly slipped it into my apron pocket seconds before Caleb came up behind me to grab his phone. The brown envelope from the Department of Motor Vehicles sat on my kitchen table, looking perfectly ordinary amongst the afternoon mail. To anyone else, it was just another piece of government correspondence. But as I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, I knew it held the power of a bomb. I had managed to slip it into my apron pocket just moments before Caleb had come back for his phone, and I'd spent the last hour in an agony of suspense, waiting for him and Jessica to finally leave after their party planning whirlwind. Through the kitchen window, I could see Liam out in the yard, pushing the old lawnmower with a steady rhythm, his face set in concentration under the Friday sun. He was a good boy, so full of his grandfather's quiet integrity. He deserved the world, and he certainly deserved better than a father who would use his own son's 18th birthday party as the backdrop for a petty, deceitful crime. The sight of him, so honest and hard-working, erased any last flicker of doubt I might have had. He was worthy of this legacy. He was the reason I had to see this through. When the sound of their SUV finally faded down the street, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The house was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I walked to the table and picked up the envelope. The paper felt flimsy, impossibly light for the weight of the secret it contained. My hands, which had been so steady while baking a cake, now trembled slightly as I carefully tore open the seal. The document I pulled out was crisp, official, and smelled of fresh ink and bureaucracy. It was a new certificate of title. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the technical jargon and official seals until they found the line I was looking for, the one that mattered more than all the others. Vehicle owner, Liam F. Hayes. The name was printed in stark, indisputable black letters. It was real. It was done. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine, unburdened smile I had felt in weeks. It wasn't a smile of joy, but one of profound relief, of grim triumph, of justice waiting patiently in the wings. I had taken back control. I had forged my own signature, not of forgery and theft, but of protection and truth. With a newfound purpose that felt like electricity in my veins, I went to the old wooden secretary desk in the living room, the one that had been Frank's. From a deep drawer, I took out a clean, simple gift envelope and the original set of keys to the Camry. They were attached to the simple leather fob Frank had used for years, the leather worn smooth by his touch. I held them for a moment, their weight cool and familiar in my palm. Then I carefully folded the new certificate of title and slipped it inside the envelope. I dropped the keys in after it. They landed with a soft, final clink. The gift was ready. The trap was set. I sealed the envelope, a decisive press of my thumb along the adhesive strip. I walked to my bedroom and placed it in the top drawer of my nightstand, underneath a stack of old lavender-scented linens that had been my mother's. It was safe. Everything was in its place. Everything was ready for the final act. Just as I closed the drawer, my phone rang, its cheerful tone a jarring intrusion into the charged silence of the house. I saw Jessica's name on the screen and took a moment to compose myself, smoothing my voice into one of pleasant, grandmotherly warmth before I answered. "Hello, dear." "Irene, hi." Her voice was saccharine, bubbling with a false sweetness that made my teeth ache. "I just wanted to let you know that everything is ready for tomorrow. The decorations are all sorted, the food is ordered. It's going to be absolutely perfect." She paused for what I knew was dramatic effect. "And Caleb has a big surprise for Liam, too. I just know he's going to be so happy." I looked at the closed nightstand drawer where my own surprise lay in wait, a cold, hard smile touching my lips. "Oh, I'm sure he will be, Jessica," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "I'm sure he will be." The smell of grilling burgers from the barbecue was rich in the afternoon air, mixed with the sound of laughter and the upbeat rhythm of a summer playlist streaming from a portable speaker. My backyard was full of people, family, neighbors I'd known for 30 years, and a dozen of Liam's boisterous friends from school. It was a perfect portrait of a happy family celebration, a perfect, beautiful, and utterly fragile lie. I circulated among the guests with a tray of iced tea, a serene smile fixed on my face, playing the part of the proud, doting grandmother. But underneath the placid surface, my heart was a ticking clock, counting down the minutes to an explosion only I knew was coming. I glanced at the old gold-plated watch on my wrist, the one that had been Frank's. The slim black hands pointed to 5 minutes before 3 p.m., almost time. The party was in full swing. Liam was the bright, happy center of it all, standing by a table laden with presents. His face was lit with pure, uncomplicated joy as he opened gifts from his friends. He'd gotten gift cards for the college bookstore, a new video game he'd been wanting, and then came the grand finale, a sleek silver laptop from Caleb and Jessica. They stood on either side of him, beaming like the most generous parents in the world as he lifted it from its box with a gasp of awe. "Dad, Mom, this is wow, thank you," he said, his voice full of genuine gratitude. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I had no doubt they'd purchased his future with the anticipated sale of his past, a gift funded by the betrayal of his grandfather's legacy. Just as Liam was being congratulated by his friends, I saw him. A man I'd never seen before appeared at the back gate, which had been left open for guests to come and go. He was out of place in this festive suburban scene, dressed in a faded polo shirt with a small grease stain on the collar and heavy work boots. He hovered uncertainly by the entrance, his weary eyes scanning the crowd, clearly searching for someone. He spotted Caleb and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I watched my son's reaction, every muscle in my body tensing. The cheerful, proud father mask he'd been wearing all day dropped. For a split second, I saw raw, unadulterated panic flash in his eyes before he quickly composed himself. He muttered something to Jessica, who immediately moved to pull Liam and his friends toward the drink station, her laughter suddenly a little too loud, a little too shrill. Caleb made his way through the crowd, his movement stiff, intercepting the stranger before he could get any further into the yard. He spoke to the man in a low, urgent voice, gesturing discreetly toward the side of the house, toward the garage, trying to steer him out of sight. The interaction was quick and furtive, but not quick enough. I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, raise an eyebrow from her lawn chair, and across the lawn, sitting on the deck with a glass of lemonade, David Davies met my gaze. He'd seen it all. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, a silent signal almost invisible to anyone else. It was time. The stage was set. I set my tray down on a nearby table, my hands surprisingly steady. The moment was here. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, I began to walk toward my son and his unwelcome guest, who were now standing in the shadows by the garage door, deep in their hushed, illicit conversation. As I approached, I raised my voice, not shouting but making it clear and bright, a pleasant, carrying tone that cut through the party chatter and drew the attention of everyone nearby. "Caleb!" I called out, my tone one of perfect, innocent curiosity, as a dozen conversations faltered. "Aren't you going to introduce your friend to everyone?" Every eye in the backyard turned toward us. The cheerful party music, which had been a lively backdrop just moments before, seemed to fade into a distant, tinny buzz. The playful shouts of Liam's friends died on their lips. My neighbor's friendly chat faltered into silence. The play was reaching its final act, and the entire audience was holding its breath. Caleb and the stranger, Jake, stood frozen by the garage, caught in the uncomfortable spotlight of my question. Caleb's face had gone a sickly shade of pale, a stark contrast to his festive blue polo shirt. It was the car dealer who broke the spell. Completely oblivious to the intricate family drama he had just stumbled into, he simply wanted to get his business done. He stepped forward, wiping his hands on his worn work pants, his expression one of weary impatience. "No trouble, ma'am," he said in a gruff, straightforward voice. "I'm just here to pick up the Camry like we arranged. Mr. Caleb here said everything was ready to go. Got the cash right here." He patted the bulky pocket of his pants. A collective, audible gasp went through the guests. I saw my sister-in-law, Carol, who was standing by the drink table, bring a hand to her mouth in shock. Jessica rushed forward from across the lawn, attempting a brittle, unconvincing laugh that sounded more like shattering glass. "Oh, Jake, you're such a kidder," she chirped, her voice a full octave too high. "My husband was just playing a little birthday prank on his mom. Right, honey?" She looked at Caleb, her eyes wide with frantic appeal. Caleb, grasping at the lifeline she'd thrown him, nodded frantically. "Yeah, Mom, a prank, that's all. Just a bad joke." His eyes, however, pleaded with me, begging me to play along, to save him from this public implosion of his own making. But the time for games, for lies, for polite family fictions was over. "Hold on now," I said, my voice cutting through their desperate scrambling with a quiet authority that silenced the yard completely. I turned my back on their panicked faces, dismissing them, and walked over to Liam. He was standing by the gift table, his young face a canvas of utter bewilderment. I held out the simple, cream-colored gift envelope I had been carrying in my apron pocket. "Happy 18th birthday, my dear boy," I said, my voice full of a love that was real and true, in a yard suddenly choked with deceit. "Your grandfather would have been so proud of the man you're becoming. He wanted you to have this." Every guest, every family member leaned in, their attention now fully, intensely focused on us. Liam took the envelope, his brow furrowed in confusion. He tore it open, his movement slow and uncertain. The first thing he pulled out was the small, familiar set of keys to the 1998 Camry. They jingled softly in the dead silent yard, the only sound besides the distant hum of a lawnmower down the street. He stared at them, a question forming in his eyes, then looked at me. "Go on," I urged gently. He reached back into the envelope and pulled out the single folded document. It was crisp, official, and heavy with a significance he couldn't yet comprehend. He unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the official letterhead of the Department of Motor Vehicles. I watched his expression shift as he read, his lips moving silently. The confusion on his face slowly gave way to a dawning, stunning realization. He looked from the paper to the old green Camry sitting peacefully in the garage and back again. Then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, but carried to every corner of the silent, watching party, he read the words that changed everything. Certificate of title, vehicle owner, Liam F. Hayes. He stopped, the hand holding the paper beginning to tremble. He looked up, his wide, shocked eyes locking with mine. All the noise of the world, all the lies and whispers, all the years of secrets and resentments, all of it vanished, leaving only his one, simple, breathless question hanging in the charged air. "Grandma, is this real?" "It's real, sweetheart," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence that had fallen over the party. "Perfectly legal." I turned from Liam's shocked, questioning face to the car dealer, who was looking back and forth between Caleb and the official document in Liam's hand, his expression souring with the realization he'd been played. "I'm very sorry for the misunderstanding, sir," I said, my tone polite but firm, my words carrying to every corner of the yard. "But this car was legally transferred to my grandson last Tuesday at the Department of Motor Vehicles. I'm afraid you've wasted a trip." Then I turned my full, undivided attention to my son. Caleb was ashen, his mouth slightly agape, looking like a cornered animal desperately searching for an escape that didn't exist. All the swagger, all the condescending patience had vanished, replaced by the raw, primal panic of being caught. I took a single, deliberate step closer, and the space between us crackled with a tension that was almost unbearable. His eyes darted around, looking for help, for an ally, but he found none. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to stand in the spotlight of his own deceit. And then I spoke, my voice low and clear, a silver knife in the quiet afternoon. "I was in the garage last Saturday, Caleb. When you were on the phone with this gentleman, I heard everything." I watched the last bit of color drain from his face as comprehension dawned. I leaned in just a little closer, my voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more damning than a shout, making sure he, and only he, could hear the echo of his own cruelty. "Now, you tell me, is this old woman's signature easy enough to fake?" Something inside him seemed to shatter. He physically recoiled as if I had struck him, a choked, guttural sound escaping his lips, and that was the signal for Jessica's world to implode. "Caleb, I told you this was a stupid idea," she shrieked, her own carefully constructed performance collapsing into a torrent of panicked, ugly tears and furious accusations. "I told you she was smarter than you thought. I told you not to be so arrogant, but you never, ever listened to me." The car dealer, Jake, now fully understanding he'd been made a party to attempted fraud, threw his hands up in disgust. "You've got to be kidding me," he spat, glaring at Caleb with pure contempt. "You tried to sell me a car you didn't even own? You wasted my time for this family circus? Forget it. You can keep your junk." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the yard without a backward glance, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The spell was broken. Guests started murmuring, averting their eyes, suddenly finding their shoes or the half-eaten burgers on their plates incredibly interesting. Across the lawn, I saw David Davies sitting calmly on the deck, take a slow, deliberate sip of his lemonade, a grimly satisfied look on his face. Caleb stood there, mute and utterly humiliated, as his wife continued to sob and berate him. He looked at me, his eyes swimming with a toxic cocktail of shame and impotent rage, but no words came out. He had no lies left to tell. I looked past him, past his crumbling world, and addressed the remaining guests, my voice ringing with a strength I hadn't felt in years. "This car," I said, gesturing toward the old, beloved Camry, "is not a piece of property for sale. It's a memory. It is the legacy of a good and honest man, my husband." I paused, letting my gaze sweep from my son's broken form to my grandson's wide, watching eyes. "And a legacy," I finished, my voice clear and strong, "is only given to those who know how to cherish it." That was the end. The party was over. People began to make their excuses, offering me awkward, sympathetic glances as they collected their children and their belongings, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of a family imploding. Through it all, Caleb and Jessica didn't move. They just stood there, marooned in the middle of my backyard, utterly alone in the wreckage of their own making, surrounded by nothing but the damning evidence of their greed and the contemptuous silence of those who had witnessed their spectacular and very public downfall. When the last car had pulled away and the final awkward goodbyes had been said, the backyard was left with only a profound silence and the sad debris of a party that had died too soon. Plates of cold, half-eaten burgers and potato salad sat on the tables. A few brightly colored balloons, now looking garish and out of place, bobbed listlessly in the evening breeze. Caleb and Jessica were still there, standing near the scorched patch of grass where the barbecue had been. They hadn't moved. Liam stood by the back door, a silent statue caught between his warring family members. It was Caleb who finally broke the silence, his voice a low, venomous growl. He looked at me, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. "You've ruined everything," he breathed, the words heavy with blame. I looked back at my son, the man I no longer recognized, and felt a deep, aching sadness rather than anger. "No, Caleb," I replied, my voice steady. "You did that a long time ago." That was all it took. The dam of his self-control broke. "Me!" he yelled, his voice cracking with a lifetime of resentment. "You did this. It was always about him, wasn't it? About Dad. Even after he was gone, it was still about his memories, his things. That stupid piece of junk in the garage was always more important to you than I was." "It was your plan, Caleb," Jessica suddenly shrieked, turning on him, her face blotchy and stained with tears. "It was your sloppy, stupid plan. I told you she was smarter than you thought. I told you not to be so arrogant, but you never listen." "You were right there with me," he shot back, his rage now directed at her. "You were just as excited about the money, because you promised it would work." They stood there, under the string of festive lights that now seemed to mock them, tearing each other apart over the ashes of their failed scheme. It was ugly, raw, and pathetic. They weren't partners. They were just co-conspirators whose plot had unraveled. Liam flinched at every shouted word, his face pale. Finally, Jessica grabbed her purse from a chair. "This is all your fault," she spat at Caleb. "Everything." She stormed toward the gate without a backward glance at me or her son. Caleb watched her go, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked from her retreating back to me, and the expression in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated hatred. There was no remorse. There was no shame. There was only the fury of a man who had been caught. He started to follow Jessica, but stopped at the edge of the deck. He turned back, his face contorted. "Don't expect to see me again," he said, the words cold and final. "Mom." He let the last word hang in the air, a final twisted jab, before turning and disappearing into the twilight. I watched him go, feeling the final thread that connected us as mother and son snap. It didn't break with a loud noise, but with a quiet, devastating finality. The sound of their SUV's engine roared to life and then faded down the street, leaving an even deeper silence in its wake. I stood there for a long time, looking at the empty gate. Then I felt a presence beside me. It was Liam. He was watching the empty street where his parents had just vanished, and then he slowly turned to look at me, his young face holding a complex, unreadable expression of sorrow, confusion, and a dawning, painful understanding. The old Camry stood there under the porch light, no longer just a car, but a silent witness to everything that had been broken and everything that had been saved. After a long, quiet hour of cleaning the wreckage of the party, Liam and I were the only ones left. He hadn't said much, just helped me clear the plates and fold the chairs, his movement slow and heavy with the weight of the evening. Finally, I put a hand on his arm. "Come with me, sweetheart." We walked to the garage in silence. I flicked on the single overhead light bulb, which cast a warm, golden glow over the car's polished hood. We stood beside it, the air thick with the scent of car wax and the unspoken grief of a family torn apart. Liam finally broke the silence, his voice raw. "I don't understand how he could do that, Grandma." I reached into my pocket and took out the keys, placing them gently into his hand once more. This time, it wasn't for a show. This time, it was for real. "This isn't about punishment, Liam," I said softly, looking into his troubled eyes. "I didn't do this to hurt your father. I did this to protect your grandfather's memory." I ran my hand along the cool metal of the car's roof. "Your grandfather believed in integrity. He believed that how you do things is more important than what you have. This car, it was never about the money. For your father, it became a symbol of a quick payout. For me, and for your grandfather, it was a symbol of honest work, of promises kept, of a life built together. That's the legacy he left, and it's not something that can be sold for $2,500. Liam looked down at the keys in his palm, then back at me, and his eyes were full of a sudden, clear understanding. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight. His shoulders shook with a single silent sob. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for the car, thank you for the lesson." I hugged him back, my own tears finally falling. They were tears of loss, but also of a profound, quiet hope. I had lost a son, but I had not lost my family. After a moment, he pulled away and looked at the car with a new reverence. He opened the driver's side door and slid into the seat, the old springs groaning softly. He didn't start the engine. He just sat there, placing his hands on the worn leather of the steering wheel, right where his grandfather's hands had been for so many years. "I'll take good care of it, Grandma," he said, his voice steady now, filled with a new maturity. "I promise." I stood in the doorway of the garage watching him. The single light bulb illuminated his young face, and in that moment I saw the best parts of Frank shining through him. The kindness, the strength, the integrity. The bomb had gone off and the damage was severe. But here, in the quiet aftermath, amidst the ashes of so many lies, the true legacy had been passed on. It was safe, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt at peace. As I closed the garage door that night, the soft click of the lock felt like the final word in a long, painful chapter. I had learned that protecting your legacy isn't about holding on to things. It's about entrusting them to those who understand their true worth, and that real family is a bond you earn through respect, not an invoice you are obligated to pay. The quiet hum of my old refrigerator was the only sound in the house, a peaceful sound I had fought for and won. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect the people or the principles that you love?